So, I've been to a lot of European capitals, but this is definitely the warmest, not literally speaking, the air is freezing, but the warmest looking place I've been yet.
Copenhagen and Amsterdam are two European capitals that have quite a bit more in common than you might think, but of course, also distinctive differences. As the capitals of Denmark and the Netherlands, respectively, both cities are densely packed with distinctive cultures, architecture, and cityscapes. Here on A Sense of Travel, my goal is to capture the five senses of as many cities, countries, and natural landmarks around the world as I possibly can, so that I can accurately immerse you into the physical experience of these places through the screen. That said, today, I'm diving into more than just the things you can experience through photography or videos or bullet lists. How do Copenhagen and Amsterdam stack up in the way that they smell, the way the air feels, the ambience and the lore that creates the magic of the atmosphere, the sounds that fill your ears in the city streets, and, of course, the tastes that define each experience? Well, find out today in the latest installment of Comparing the Senses, Copenhagen versus Amsterdam. Now, after the video, be sure to comment on which of these two cities you find has an experience that fits your persona more. I'm Michael, and this is A Sense of Travel. Let's dive in. So before we take on the senses, let's take a look at some very quick facts about each city in case you aren't familiar with either one. Copenhagen has a population of around 660,000 people in its city limits and 2.2 million in the metro area, the second largest in all of Scandinavia. Amsterdam's city limits hold over 900,000 people, but like Copenhagen, its metro area is around 2.5 million people. In other words, size-wise, these two canal-ridden capitals are about as comparable as it gets. Now, Copenhagen sits on the eastern edge of Denmark and the Scandinavian region of Europe, which comprises of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Amsterdam lies near the north coast of continental Europe in the Netherlands, which is a Central European country bordered by Belgium and Germany. So the first thing to look at when stacking up Copenhagen and Amsterdam is perhaps the most obvious thing: their cityscapes. So let's kick off in Copenhagen. Copenhagen has been nicknamed the City of Spires by many, and it makes perfect sense. The horizon, no matter which direction you turn, is defined by majestic and, in some case, eclectic spires, steeples, domes, and towers. Now, Copenhagen is a spectacular sea of clay terracotta roofs, aged green bronze domes and spires, warm-colored facades in the low-rise buildings, gaping canals, and lush green trees. Warm facades of rustic oranges, golds, reds, and browns, joined by the warm brick and stone, make up the color palette of Copenhagen, and there's a definitive sense of where you are on the planet. Things like majestic swans in the waterways, gold-plated flagpoles, spires poking out of the horizontal skyline, cobbles integrated into nearly every sidewalk, occasional horse-drawn carriages, and wide, magnificent boulevards preserve an ambience of an old fairy tale set in the world of Danish royalty here in Copenhagen. If you're not from Europe, when you think of Denmark, the beach might not be the first thing that comes to mind. It certainly wasn't what came to mind for me, but pleasantly surprisingly, you can't talk about the cityscape without mentioning the beaches. Each evening in Copenhagen, I walked or took the metro to Amager Beach, a barrier island facing the saltwater strait between Denmark and Sweden. It's a relaxing, peaceful, beachy setting that really gives Copenhagen that added sense of a beach town. Amsterdam, which sits over 7 feet below sea level, is incredibly influenced by the water. The ring of canals that make up its old town, which we'll explore soon, and water in general is a huge component of the Amsterdam cityscape. There are no bare facades in Amsterdam. Every single building involves some degree of ornamentalism. Many of the old brick buildings lean at odd angles with black inserts in between them to hold them strong, some protruding forward, others to the left or the right. Now, the whimsical nature of the brick buildings, accented in white and topped with roof lines of arches, stepped bricks, and gables, creates an atmosphere right out of a storybook. As you wander about, you'll notice that Amsterdam's city streets aren't cobbled, but they're rather paved in a brown brick. You'll find that the Amsterdam flag flies far more often and prominently than the Dutch flag, and that generally speaking, the color palette is pretty muted. Throughout town, you'll notice a lot of brick and concrete and interesting modern structures as well. There are a few modern high-rises in Amsterdam, but they're away from the old city center and they aren't super imposing. The high-rises here aren't that tall, but they do have really interesting shapes. For example, building blocks on top of each other at odd angles with trees atop the exposed part of each block. The old heart of Copenhagen, Amsterdam, is both majestic and magical, both modern and ancient, and both densely packed in with buildings and covered in lush green parks. Colorful, warm building facades of plaster painted in golden yellows, deep blues, rustic oranges, whites, and reds, alongside medieval buildings of stone and brick, blanket the city, which is topped with red clay terracotta roofs. At the ground level and alongside the cars carefully cruising down the streets are hundreds of cyclists on their way to work. Cycling is one of the most popular means of commuting in Copenhagen, thanks to the city's topography. It's insanely flat.
If somebody told me right now that I was at the highest natural point in Copenhagen, I would probably believe them.
Perhaps the most photographed part of Amsterdam is the beautifully colorful row of merchants' houses along the canal front, Nieuwhout. This waterfront strip is absolutely gorgeous and just as colorful as it seems in the pictures. The houses, some very narrow and others quite wide, range from rustic golds and reds to pastel pinks and blues, shades of white and deep blues, and ranges of light and dark brick. The houses and the shops range between 4 and 5 stories tall, with attic windows protruding out of the terracotta roofs. Cobblestone streets line the deep green canal, which is lined with a series of both modern and older sailboats, most of which boast the Danish flag. Central Amsterdam, or Centrum, has to be one of the largest old towns I've ever seen. Ringed by medieval canals radiating from the center, the alleyways and streets of tilted Dutch buildings packed narrowly together stretch for ages. The buildings lining the multiple rings of canals in Centrum are both intricately ornate and diverse. Each and every facade looks unique in some way, whether it's through the varying roof lines, the general facades, the accent colors and the placement, the heights. They all collectively create an eclectic and busy but somehow cohesive feeling throughout the old town. The aged, tree-lined canals cutting through the medieval streets are filled with a deep, murky brown water. Riverboats and city tours ripple the water underneath the arched bridges, which are lined with flower pots and planters and filled with cyclists, pedestrians, and perhaps the occasional car. As you gaze through the shops and the markets, you notice dozens of cheese shops, head shops, businesses oriented to the free spirit, your typical chain stores, and an abundance of plant and flower shops. Flower markets are pretty big here. The city's overall color palettes differ quite a bit in regard to their overall cityscape, as indicated right here. When you see a video or a picture of a place and you try to imagine what it must feel like to actually be there, an important component is the way the air smells. Let's see how Copenhagen and Amsterdam stack up. Copenhagen's scentscape is full of nautical and fairytale reminiscent smells. Salt water from the sea, the aging wood of old timber houses and wooden boats, damp clay and brick from the rows of medieval homes, and fresh green grass and earth fill the cool air in Copenhagen. Thanks to the long sandy beaches, the scent of beachy sand joins that scent of saltwater here. Now that old fairy tale scentscape really comes into play with the scent of sweet Danish pastries from the countless bakeries. All things considered, if I were to create a candle that smelled just like Copenhagen, it would smell of saltwater, pastry bread, aged wood, and old brick. Now, water influences the scents in Copenhagen for sure, but in Amsterdam, the scents you'll experience are a whole new level of waterlogged. Fishy river water rolls through the dozens of canals in the heart of Centrum, right along the wafts of cannabis, cigarette smoke, and damp brick. Away from the canals, sweet Dutch bakeries baking up poffertjes and stroopwafel and Dutch apple pies add a sweet layer to the damp air. The breeze also carries the aroma of tulips from the flower pots and the shops. If I could make a candle that captured the smells of Amsterdam, it would include river water, chocolate, hemp, earth, smoke, and tulips. Both Copenhagen and Amsterdam, while famous for a couple of standouts that we'll touch on, have a sweet tooth. Let's see how those sweet tastes and signature cuisines stack up. Let's start in Copenhagen. As Denmark's capital city, Copenhagen is filled to the brim with delicious Danish cuisine, and I wish I could have tried it all, but alas, Copenhagen is incredibly expensive to dine in, so I only had a few. Here are a few of those city-defining dishes. Kanelsnegl. Each person I asked in Copenhagen's cafes, what would you say is the most typical dish for Denmark, pointed me towards the Danish cinnamon rolls, or as the literal translation goes, cinnamon snails. Who am I to argue with the locals? They make great recommendations. Danish cinnamon rolls, fresh from the bakery, are delicious, sticky, and sweet. Rød Pilsner. I recently got some backlash on this, but I wanted to point out that for most people, you wouldn't expect hot dog stands to be that big of a deal in Denmark. The Danes, however, do love their red sausages. Red on the outside and white on the inside, the sausages have a rather pungent but good taste, and when placed on a hot dog bun are paired with onions, fried onions, and a sauce that's kind of reminiscent of ketchup and barbecue. Smørrebrød open sandwiches. Expensive but delicious and worth it, smørrebrød is a Scandinavian staple and a Danish favorite. This open-faced brown bread sandwich can be covered in multiple things. In my case, I had one with marinated herring and capers, one with apple, one with chicken salad, mushrooms, and bacon, and one with potatoes and caramelized cheese. They were all delicious. While still sweet, the tastes that define Amsterdam are quite a bit more hearty than Copenhagen, and certainly cheaper. Still, Amsterdam is a sweet-tasting city. They just like those sweet tastes to be fried. And I mean, who could blame them? Here are just a few of the dishes that I think capture the Dutch capital's culinary identity. Stroopwafel. At Van Holland, near Dam Square, I found perhaps the sweetest treat in the Netherlands. Stroopwafel. A stroopwafel is a classic Dutch dessert, and this large, thin, flattened waffle is doused in melted dark chocolate and covered in dense, sweet chocolate shavings packed in with a heavily sweet punch. Bitterballen. Dutch snacks abound in Amsterdam, and one that really stuck out was bitterballen, little fried balls of beef stew that was refrigerated until thickened. These crunchy, pot pie flavor reminiscent little guys were found at the restaurant and bar attached to Hotel Prince Hendrik near the central station. Poffertjes. At René's Croissants near Dam Square, I dug into a sweet Dutch breakfast delicacy called poffertjes. Miniature pancakes soaked in maple syrup, dusted in powdered sugar, and served alongside a delicious coffee, poffertjes might be my new favorite form of pancakes. Oorlog French fries. Found at a small fry shop called Belmanic's Sausmeesters are oorlog patates. Fried much in the same way as the Belgians, once in hot grease and then again in an even hotter grease, this Dutch-style cone of fries was topped with a thick Thai peanut sauce, mayonnaise, and onions. So as you can see, there's no clear winner on the tastes here, and it's entirely subjective. This is also not even close to a comprehensive list of the defining tastes of each city. Copenhagen is a remarkably quiet city, outside of the heavily touristed portions, that is to say. If you're anywhere near the Little Mermaid statue or the Tivoli Gardens, it's going to sound like crowds at a festival. As you imagine yourself in the light, pleasant city squares, the sounds that fill your ears include light pedestrian chatter, the cry of seabirds, the clanging of street dining cutlery, and occasional street music. On the hour, you'll hear church bells echoing out into the city. The sound of cars is rare thanks to Copenhagen's high walkability, rather famous bike network, and modern public transportation system, although the occasional work van will clatter along those cobbles. Amsterdam, in comparison, is also a refreshingly quiet city, at least by day. The sounds of street dining, bike bells dinging, and seabirds crying fill the relatively quiet atmosphere. Just like in Copenhagen, a large part of the quiet soundscape is the lack of cars. At least in Centrum, there just aren't that many. Instead, the city is filled with cyclists, motorbikes, and pedestrians. Instead of the massive parking lots you'd find in the United States, Amsterdam's center is filled with small parking decks made exclusively for bikes. Copenhagen, while certainly a bit brisk and chilly, especially thanks to the winds coming off the sea and rolling right over the incredibly flat landscape, isn't quite as chilly as you might expect, especially as the gateway to Scandinavia. In fact, Copenhagen can be quite pleasantly warm in the springtime, and when it is, the city feels like a giant outdoor lounge where Danes and tourists alike soak up the sun. Now, Amsterdam is a good bit further south, but you'll find it to be just as windy and brisk, again thanks to the sea. Still, just like in Copenhagen, spring and summer in the city can be quite warm and thankfully rather dry, meaning that the atmosphere feels perfectly pleasant. Places like Vondelpark really showcase just how pleasant. I mean, seriously, a warm sunny day in this lush, earthy green park feels like the epitome of bliss. So what do I mean when I talk about the comparison of the ambience and the lore of each city? Well, for starters, I'm a strong proponent of the idea that to really capture the spirit and the magic of places around the world, you have to let your imagination run a bit wild. After all, urban legends, mythological fairy tales, and dramatized history are a big part of the identity of cities and countries worldwide. Letting fantasy and folklore infiltrate your mind as you wander about can really bring out that mystique and charm in different places. Copenhagen, generally speaking of course, feels like a royal fairy tale straight out of a Hans Christian Andersen storybook. Horses trotting along the cobbled streets, royal palaces like Christianborg, medieval golden-laced spires, statues like the Little Mermaid, colorful merchants' houses, magical theme parks, and old stone castles like Rosenborg Castle create a sense in Copenhagen that you're living in a Disney cartoon, but, with a proper sense of elegance and sophistication. Copenhagen, even in the brick-laced neighborhoods away from Andreby, has just enough grit and wear to feel like a lived-in city, but enough of a twinkle to feel just like the setting of a true fairy tale kingdom. It's a magical place that really feels like it belongs in one of the tales that Hans Christian Andersen would have crafted up himself. Amsterdam, in contrast, feels like a medieval fishing village straight out of a fantasy film. When I first visited, the first thing I thought of was Lake Town from The Hobbit. The tilted brick buildings along the gaping canals, spanned by arched bridges and punctuated by ornate decorations, all beneath the iconic Amsterdam flag billowing in the wind, makes for an atmosphere that would fit right into the fantasy kingdoms of old. Amsterdam's colorful, artistic, and certainly countercultural identity can be felt no matter where you turn, whether it's an accidental stroll through the red light district, a walk through Vincent van Gogh's priceless art, or a cannabis-scented stroll through Vondelpark. Round it all out with that presence of royalty at the Dutch royal palace, and it's hard not to imagine yourself as the main character of an intriguing and rather mysterious adventure. Now, the idea here isn't to pit these two cities up against each other. In fact, the idea is to celebrate the fact that there's so much world to discover, experience, and explore. Thanks for diving into the Danish and Dutch capitals of Copenhagen and Amsterdam with me today, and stay tuned for more city comparisons in the near future. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.